Unreal Tournament is a multiplayer first-person shooter developed by Epic Games and Digital Extremes and published by GT Interactive in 1999. The game is based on the same engine that powered Unreal a year prior, but the design of the game focused on competitive multiplayer action. It's more of a side series to the Unreal storyline. In an attempt to control violence among deep space miners, the New Earth government legalizes deathmatch. The Liandri Mining Corporation establishes a series of leagues for these deathmatch tournaments and soon becomes their most profitable business venture. You're just another player in the competition and you don't care about the storyline. It may be set in the Unreal universe, but it's purely a multiplayer game, so we'll leave it at that. Going from Unreal to Unreal Tournament, one of the biggest differences are the weapons. Many of them do return here, but they've been reworked and they feel much better to use in a multiplayer game. The flak cannon fires much faster than before. It's one of my favorite weapons in the series and they made it even better here. The 8-ball gun, minigun, ASMD shock rifle, and the GES bio rifle are largely unchanged, with the 8-ball gun now being called the rocket launcher. The automag is now the enforcer and it can be dual-wielded. It's actually quite nice if you can get your hands on another one. The Razorjack is now the Ripper, with a faster rate of fire and an explosive secondary attack. The Dispersion Pistol and the Stinger were removed completely. The Dispersion Pistol was useless in a multiplayer game where the bigger weapons were easily accessible, and the Stinger functioned as an underpowered minigun and flak cannon combo, so there was no point in having them here. Other weapons were added in its place, like the Pulse Gun for close-range damage over time, and the Impact Hammer as your last resort melee weapon. But the one weapon that stood out the most was a man-portable nuclear missile launcher, the Redeemer. This one-off weapon can be guided to its target, or you can fire and forget. Deliver this into a crowd and watch your frag count skyrocket. There's plenty of fun to be had with these amazing weapons, but Unreal Tournament is much more than that. In addition to the usual deathmatch and team deathmatch, there were multiple game modes you can choose from. Domination requires teams to capture and hold control points around the map. Your team's score increases over time based on how many control points your team owns. The more control points you have, the faster your score increases. The gameplay here is very action-packed, as going from one control point to another can leave the previous one vulnerable to capture by the enemy team. In addition to all the standard weapons, you're given a translocator that you can fire and teleport to, opening up more options for navigation around the map. Camping or sitting around to defend the control points will actually put you at a disadvantage because not only are you not collecting the items and power-ups around the map, you're also giving free reign to the enemy team over the other control points. Capture the Flag was popularized in the Quake mod. Now it's in every multiplayer FPS, including Unreal Tournament. The goal here is, of course, to take the enemy team's flag and bring it back to yours to capture it. Most of the maps are symmetrical, so you have the same base layout regardless of what team you're on. Others not so much. A few of them go for a more asymmetrical layout or a more natural theme to the level design, just to mix things up and make it more interesting. The translocator is available here as well, but using it while carrying the flag will force you to drop it. As with other games with the CTF game mode, players adopt different offensive and defensive roles and strategies to win. What's arguably the most popular game mode in Unreal Tournament was Assault, mainly because there was nothing like it before. There are two teams, the attackers and the defenders. The attackers are given a series of objectives they have to complete, for example, flipping a switch or destroying an object. They have to complete the objectives within the given time limit. The defenders have to stop them from completing these objectives. When the objectives are met or the time runs out, the two teams switch sides and the roles are reversed. The team who completes the objectives in the fastest time is the winner. Assault in particular had a problem with simply not giving you enough information. Playing a map for the first time can be very confusing. You can bring up a list of objectives and they'll tell you what you're supposed to do, but good luck finding them on the map. Once you've memorized them and did them successfully a couple times, then it's no longer a problem. But there are still times I've had trouble figuring out which objective we're currently on. If you're not paying attention, you could miss the key message that tells you what you're supposed to be doing. These game modes can also be tweaked to your liking. In addition to the usual rule sets like the frag and time limits, you can include a number of mutators that change the dynamics of the game. You can add a chainsaw to the game, you could have low gravity, you can restrict everyone to a single weapon. You can remove power-ups from the game, or you can add new ones. The most popular mutator is Instagib. Everyone has a one-hit kill shock rifle, so it's just a matter of point and click. It's a very simple mutator, and it's not something you would play with all the time, but who knew it could be so much fun in small doses? Just between the weapons, the game modes, and the mutators, you already have an awesome game. The single player mode is essentially a fixed set of challenges against bots, so I have to question the thought process that went into making this. The difficulty doesn't necessarily increase as you progress. That's set at the very beginning, and that only sets the difficulty of the bots. The real oddity here are the match settings and the maps you have to play on. The first challenge starts out okay, but then I get a 3-player free-for-all on a map where all the weapons are on one side of the map and the other side barely has anything. After that, I have a one-on-one duel in a single vertical room with only 2 weapons and an environmental hazard, which is supposed to be the gimmick on the map, but ends up being very counterproductive. It's first to 15 frags, dying from the hazard is -1 to your frag count, so if you want to win, you have to keep the bot away from the hazard. I never had much issue with the domination maps. They can easily be passed off as deathmatch maps with control points, and I had a great time with all of them. Capture the flag is where it starts going downhill. Most of the CTF maps have one entrance into the base with an easy to hold choke point. Dreary comes to mind with its uphill ramp and flak cannon pickup in the flag room. And whose bright idea was it to make the first CTF match a 2-on-2 with the opposing team having easier access to the rocket launcher? The asymmetrical maps usually have some sort of gimmick in the level design to make them interesting, like having the flag hard to access with a narrow bridge high above a pit of lava, but this rarely translates to a good map in the long run. The only CTF map I enjoyed was Corette, symmetrical with multiple entrances to each base and multiple entrances to the flag room. I've seen action everywhere on this map. The assault maps feel very simplistic. Many of them amount to destroying object A and then pulling switch B to complete the map. The maps here were lacking a lot of the depth that you would end up seeing in later games in the series. This objective-based gameplay is a really good idea. You just didn't have enough of it here. It seems to me that a lot of these team maps were designed with single player in mind. The average gamer loves to feel like a badass when they're mowing down bots traveling in a straight line, and it really feels like the level design for the team modes caters to this mentality. Facing Worlds is one of the most iconic maps in the game, and it's the most guilty of this. It's a CTF map with 2 towers that overlooks everything, both of which have convenient access to a sniper rifle, ammo, and armor. The only path connecting the 2 bases is completely exposed to sniper fire. It was very common for everyone to rack up hundreds of kills, but not so common for anyone to capture the flag. But man, it was fun as hell, and it's easy to understand why people enjoyed it so much. Whether it's against bots or other players, people hate losing. So here's a map you cannot lose, or win for that matter. An eternal stalemate where anyone can rack up the kills. It feels like the whole single-player campaign, if you want to call it that, was simply tacked onto the game just so it has that classic single-player experience where you have progression and a final boss you have to go up against. Despite some of the obvious gimmicks, many of the deathmatch maps were much more fleshed out for one-on-one duels or free-for-alls, some of which are revisions of the original Unreal maps like Deck 16 or Curse. Even CTF maps like Orbital are well made, but these maps are never used in the single player. If you really can't be bothered to go through with it, you can dive right into any map you want with any number of bots, mutators, and rule sets you want. It is a game with multiplayer in mind after all, and the whole single player campaign can be ignored entirely. The over-the-top announcer is one of the more iconic elements in the series. It's one thing to score some amazing frags and feel like a badass. It's another thing when the game is telling you you're a badass. It's positive reinforcement working as intended. It makes you feel good about yourself. And the sound of people dying is powerful. It's not a simple groan, it's a dying scream to let you know you killed them dead and you are awesome for it. Weapons sound powerful like it should, and everything sounded even better when you had a Sound Blaster card with EAX support. Creative pushed their 3D audio tech on many games on the market at the time, and you would notice a big difference in the quality, but the game still sounded great even without it. Every gunshot, explosion, and eventual frag sounds amazing. Although Unreal Tournament supports dynamic music as with Unreal, the game doesn't really use it here. It's pure soundtracks for kicking ass. It also has less of the softer ambient soundtracks and has more of the upbeat, high-energy industrial and metal soundtracks to get that adrenaline going. And this is the kind of music that sticks in your head. Some of you have memorized it by name: Phantom, Organic, Go Down, Foregone Destruction, the list goes on. Though it uses the same module music system from the original Unreal game, there's no point in using context-sensitive music. The only use of this system here is to make sure the soundtrack is looping properly. As long as you get hyped, you're good. In the graphics department, not a whole lot has changed going from Unreal to Unreal Tournament. You have a wide variety of environments to play in, such as spaceships, ancient temples, and urban areas. Projectiles light up the place, and you can have detailed textures when you get close to a wall. The changes that happened here in this game were small, but they were tailored for a multiplayer environment and have a big impact in this regard. Health pickups are bigger and brighter, the weapons have a much richer color to them, so they're easier to distinguish quickly from one another at a distance. Some of the weapons have their own ammo counter right on the weapon itself. Clarity of information is what it's all about. They even changed the fonts and colors of the text from oversized pixels to something that's much easier to read. You kill someone or get killed by someone, you see the text telling you this front and center. The original Unreal game had distinct and detailed worlds you can explore. It had wide open fields, claustrophobic areas, monsters jumping out of the shadows, and had tons of eye candy for you to enjoy. Unreal Tournament tosses that aside. Performance and playability were more important. Architecture was simplified. Many of the smaller pathways still had plenty of room for small skirmishes. A lot of effort was made to improve performance in the level design, while retaining as much of the good graphical qualities as possible. You may not have noticed how much more playable it is with more room and visibility. You may not have noticed the lower polygon counts while you're playing, or the higher frame rates resulting from it. But it's there, and a lot of the things I'm talking about here may seem insignificant, but it's the small things like this that make the game smooth to play and enjoyable in the long run. There is one thing I really hate though. I really hate the red flash that covers the screen when you take damage. It's very disorienting because it blinds you, even though it's for a split second. That's way too long, and there's no way to tone it down in the options menu. You have to go into the command console to disable it, but then it becomes hard to tell when you're taking damage. I just want a nice, clean indication of damage that doesn't disorient me, and there's no option for it here, so pick your poison. I eventually chose to disable it and look at my health every couple of seconds. I'd imagine many people have done this as well, but just looking at the game and listening to it, you know you're in for a real treat. With the success of Unreal on the market, that begs the obvious question: why make a multiplayer-only version of the game? The biggest reason was that the netcode for Unreal was very poor. There was a lot of lag and unresponsiveness in the online multiplayer, and despite several patches to fix the issue, the player base at large had already moved on to other games that gave a much more reliable online multiplayer experience. It effectively limited the game to single-player and offline multiplayer with bots. A new game created hype, and a multiplayer-only focus meant the development efforts were put towards making a really good multiplayer game. The late 90s saw broadband internet becoming more common, and people wanted to play their favorite games with other people. More people playing meant more competition, and that led to the growth of what is known as esports. Games like StarCraft, Age of Empires, Counter-Strike, Descent 3, and others all had a growing competitive scene, but only one game was Unreal Tournament's direct competition in the one-on-one FPS duel, and that was Quake 3 Arena. Unreal Tournament did have a fairly big competitive scene. It was featured at the World Cyber Games, and it was always in a lot of smaller LAN events. While it did have a respectable following, the fans of these fast-paced arena shooters were mainly drawn to Quake, not simply because of the name, but because of what it offered that other games lacked, games like Unreal Tournament. Rocket jumping was immensely popular because of the utility it provided, thanks to Quake's physics. This opened up the maps by allowing for alternate paths from point A to point B in exchange for some health and armor. The physics in Unreal Tournament are very limited in this regard. Explosions can send you flying off somewhere to an extent, but you take too much damage for its worth. A single rocket won't do anything for you. 3 or 4 of them will get you to an acceptable height, but will probably kill you in the process. Add in the fact that you have to charge it, and you have a rocket launcher that's useless for rocket jumping. The intended weapon for navigation was the impact hammer, but like with rocket jumping, it required you to charge the weapon before you made the jump. Both were too cumbersome to use, so no one used it. The best way to navigate the map was the dodge system, since dodging makes you move faster than running. But you don't simply take your finger off the forward key and double tap it to dodge forward, it feels very stiff. By turning 90 degrees and side dodging, you move faster and it feels smoother to execute, but you have to keep doing this. You don't maintain any momentum from the dodge. This stop and go movement was a huge turnoff to the Quake fans who favored the fluid movements of strafe jumping. Unreal Tournament is a much slower paced game overall. The weapons also had less to offer than their Quake counterparts, despite having an impressive arsenal with secondary fire modes. The weapons here are exclusively used for dealing damage, and many of them have overlapping roles, such as the sniper rifle and ASMD shock rifle being used as a long-ranged weapon. Quake 3 Arena's arsenal had much more distinct roles and offered much more utility outside of combat, such as the rocket launcher and plasma gun for rocket jumping and plasma climbing respectively. Denying access to these weapons was a big part of the game. If you don't have a railgun, you don't have an effective long-range attack. Looks can be deceiving since there was actually more depth to the weapons in Quake 3 Arena than Unreal Tournament, at least at the highest level of play. Otherwise, many of the rule sets and the terminology remains the same. Your health and armor are referred to as your stack, and having your health and armor above 100 means you have a good stack. You have to keep track of item respawn time so you can deny these items from your opponent. You have to memorize the layout of the maps and understand how to gain access to every location. Even though the objective is to get the most frags, the game at the highest level of play is all about controlling the map and preventing your opponent from doing what they want. There were quite a few mods thanks to Unreal Script and the modability of the Unreal Engine, and they were more than just mutators. They range from simply adding new weapons to complete overhauls of the gameplay. Mods like Chaos UT add a new twist to the deathmatch formula, while mods like Infiltration and Tactical Ops change the theme and gameplay to that of modern combat. Some of the mods turned into retail releases, such as with the case of Tactical Ops Assault on Terror. It's unfortunate that modern operating systems have made it very difficult, if not impossible, to run these mods again, but these mods weren't necessarily the reason to buy the game. People wanted what they can get their hands on, and unlike the original Unreal game, Unreal Tournament did have a proper demo available to the public, but it also played somewhat differently from the full version. Only a handful of maps were available, naturally. Sesmer for Domination, Koret for Capture the Flag, and 4 Deathmatch maps. These were demo versions of the maps because the weapon and item placement had to be tweaked to remove a few weapons. The sniper rifle, flak cannon, and ripper were not available in the demo, and that changed the dynamics of the gameplay a bit. Mutators were limited as well, but Instajib was in. The assault game mode was not there either, but overall, the demo was a very good representation of the game, and I remember back in the day that a lot of people went out and bought it specifically because they played the demo and they loved it. It also helped the game's success that Unreal Tournament was released 1 week before Quake 3 Arena, and that brings us to the one question on everyone's minds. Which is better, Quake 3 Arena or Unreal Tournament? Quake 3 Arena was the better competitive game. Unreal Tournament was the better game overall. The sheer amount of features and content out of the box, along with the ease of use that allows you to get a game going quickly with the options you want, made Unreal Tournament the superior game. The large scale of difficulty levels for the bots meant they can be set as easy or as hard as you want. It's not the lazy difficulty scaling either, where they just have more health or do more damage. The difficulty determines things like intelligence, reaction times, accuracy, basically the same things that separate the good players from the bad. It's a game that anyone can appreciate, even non-FPS players can understand what the big deal was. I would recommend this game to anyone who wants a good arena FPS and everyone of all skill levels. It lacks a conventional single-player mode, and the single-player mode it did have is a bit questionable. But this is a game built for multiplayer, and it gave you all the tools to have fun. If there was a LAN party starter kit, this game would be in it. Buy some liquor, get your friends together, and throw a party with some Unreal Tournament.